Thank you for the privilege of being here tonight. Thank you for a city that allows us to pray like this. Thank you for each and every one that sits on this council tonight, because they love this town, they love this state, they love this country, and they have come to do their very best. And we pray tonight that you would guide them, that you would guide all of us, that we would always seek your face and know that you will heal wherever healing is needed. And you will make our land a holy land, a healed land, a good land. So again, tonight, I pray for this city council and those who lead tonight, that you will bless them and guide them. And may the city of Lincoln be blessed because they have prayed. We pray this now. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. All right, we have 6:01, so I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Gwen, roll call, please.
Yes, Councilmember Andriotta,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Carlskent,
Here.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Here.
and Mayor Joyner.
Here. Item 3, report from closed session. We have no closed session to report out on at this time. We'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Leslie, would you lead us, please?
United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Apologize, that mic seems a little hot. We move on to item 5, agenda modifications. Any modifications the council wishes to make to the agenda, staff?
No, Mayor.
We move on to presentations. We have none this evening, which takes us to public comment on non-agenda items. This is the time for members of the public to comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. I have 2 cards at the moment. The first one is Darla Gutierrez. Darla?
Hi, I'm here for an update on the spec or the rules, if you want to call it, for where the signs can be on our streets. He was supposed to call me over a month ago and I haven't received a phone call. And the meeting in November, you weren't here and, excuse me, and you weren't mayor, she was. She commented, there was another gentleman here wanting to put some stop signs on First Street. I'm on 3rd and L. And she said it would cost $1 million for First Street or something like that. Yeah, you can go back to the record. Anyway, I'm here because I live on the corner of 3rd and L. I brought pictures that now they've sent crew or whatever to cut around. The trees were covering the signs between 1st and 3rd. I didn't bring you all the other ones that I can go on about, but that's besides the point. On the corner of 3rd and L, especially coming from Joner, there's one time, and I left a message with the police department and the chief had someone call me where just before school starts, you guys always have that sign on how fast you're going. And this had been going on for a while. The individual zoomed right through past there, going at 47 miles an hour. A person coming from McDonald's turning on K Street to the left, doing its normal thing, came and hit them. And then she tried to get out of it because I went over there and chewed her out and told her that I had video and proof of it. And then she calmed down. Then, I don't know how they took care of it, but she and the other male individual had been driving that street like if it was all there, like there's nothing in the world, and not even going straight on the road. They were actually doing this. One of the neighbors even witnessed it. But my point to this is that there's no 25 limit just when you hit O Street for the cars to know that as soon as you pass O Street, there should be a 25 limit sign there. Then before you get to L Street, there's a sign there, and I brought pictures. You can't see the 25. It's probably as old as me, because I've lived in, and Lincoln is old as whatever. But anyway, the stop sign on L Street on my corner is perfectly well on the corner for everyone to see it. But when they did the handicap thing on 3rd Street on the school side, I don't know why they did what they did, but normally you're walking, for people to walk is straight, and this one is like this. For whatever reason they did it, I don't know why. But when they were doing it, they moved the stop sign further back.
Got it.
And so if you look around, I don't know where you guys live at, but I live in old part of
Live all
town.
over town. So, Darla, I am going to have to mention that your 3 minutes is up, so if you could
Okay.
wrap up your comments.
If you ever go around Lincoln, and if you go in the old part, you'll see a lot of trees over the stop sign and all that, but this stop sign is way too far. And I'm not saying that's part of the reason they can't see it, because coming from McDonald's, going to O Street, a lot of the times it's the sun, because I'll notice the cars, they'll take off, and then they realize, oh, there was a stop sign, and they stop halfway. Or if I'm standing there, I'll act like I'm videotaping them, and then they'll like, but I shouldn't have to do that. I call the police to have people out there every once in a while.
So that we can give direction.
Mhm.
We're not allowed to speak on items
Right.
in any great depth on public comments. So I can give direction, we can give directions to staff. I think
One more
what I'm-
thing, please. Between
Very
Third,
quickly, your time is up.
I know,
Very quickly.
between Third and the railroad tracks, there's no 25 speed limit. Not
So-
one
so-
sign.
So I think I'm hearing a couple of things. You want speed limit signs posted at the transition of speeds.
Be-
So when it's reduced to 25, you want a sign right there saying that the speed limit has changed, and there's some stop
And I
signs.
want the stop signs in Third and L, because there's a school there. It should have the flashing stop sign or flashing 25 limit thing or whatever, something. Or, because you guys don't paint the stop sign until every 3 years. So in a lot of the schools in a lot of towns, they'll paint it green or red or something. But I
Got it.
mean, nobody has gotten killed yet, but
Yep.
hopefully it never happens.
I hear you loud and clear. Sean, you'll call her tomorrow morning?
Yeah, it's good
Please.
feedback. Well, probably our.
I've got your number.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that he gives you a call tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
No, he will. He will. And Travis, you've got those notes too, right? There are some restrictions that tie our hands a little bit. They'll have to go through and do some analysis. I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. All right. Next up is, I'm going to get this wrong, Riffin? Is that correct?
That's okay.
What is it?
I've got Henry. It's Riffy, Mark Riffy.
Riffy.
That's all right.
That's a Y.
That's supposed to be a Y, yes.
right.
I apologize. Good evening, council. My name is Mark Riffy, and I am the Director of Customer Service for Pioneer Community Energy. And Pioneer Community Energy, as some of you may know, is a locally owned nonprofit electricity provider powering the communities we serve, including Lincoln, with competitive rates, reliable service, and a choice of energy options. Pioneer has been serving the region, including the city of Lincoln, for 5 years, and the focus of our board has resulted in over $40 million in residential and business customer savings. Our governing board, which includes Councilmember Carlskent, recently approved rate changes for Pioneer that support a 15% discount when compared to PG&E's generation portion of the bill. This is expected to result in more than $5 million in savings for the residents and businesses of Lincoln and $46 million for all of Pioneer customers throughout Placer and El Dorado County. And that is just in 2023 alone. A Lincoln household that uses an average amount of electricity, which assumes 650 kWh a month, will save over $185 per year with Pioneer. Now, as a reminder, Pioneer provides the electricity, but the gas, transmission, and distribution of that electricity is still provided to you by PG&E. Now, we've all experienced high natural gas prices, which are driving all of our utility bills really high right now. So we'd like to make a few pointers here that can help our residents and businesses save some money on their monthly bills. First, customers who previously had opted out of Pioneer services can return to Pioneer at any time and experience those additional savings as of today. Secondly, our website offers many low to no cost energy saving tips. These tips are available to anybody that wants to access our website, whether they're a customer or not. The important thing here is every effort taken by an individual has lasting effect. It can be something as simple as turning lights off and on, resetting your thermostat, or installing LED light bulbs. Those will actually reflect savings the next month. And finally, for customers experiencing financial hardship, there's a section on our website which provides information about programs that can help support customers with bill repayment and other financial hardships. And these are statewide programs administered by PG&E and Pioneer, but all that information is available on our website. For customers wishing to join Pioneer and realize these same great savings along with 85% of their neighbors and businesses, the signing up is simple. It's an online form you fill out, or you can certainly just make the phone call. And I'll just repeat it for anybody online here. The number is 844-937-7466. Our website is simple to understand and remember. It's pioneercommunityenergy.org. Our purpose and goal here is just to make sure all of our residents and businesses are aware of the ways that they can save money, because that's what we're all about. Our mantra is it's your power, your choice. We want customers to make the decision that they want to make that's best for them and their families. Our only goal is to make sure this information is out there to the public. So we might be asking you, as well as some of your staff members, to help us just share this information. So if any of you have any questions, have follow-up conversations, Mr. Carlskind, Sean has my contact information. We're happy to follow up any other time you need to. But with that, good night, and thank you for everything you do for the city of Lincoln.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda? Anyone online, Gwen?
We do have a few folks online, but I don't see any hands raised, Mayor.
Okay. With that, I'll move on from public comment to the consent agenda. I don't believe any of my fellow council members wish to pull an item. Any member of the public wish to have the council pull an item for discussion? Anyone online, Gwen?
No hands are raised, Mayor.
All right. Then we'll go ahead and move to the consent agenda, and I will accept a motion.
Okay, I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Gwen, roll call, please.
Yes, Councilmember Andriotta,
Yes.
Councilmember Carl Skint,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Yes.
and Mayor Joyner.
Yes. We move on to public hearings. We have one item, item 9A, waive the first reading and introduce by title only ordinance 1059B, amending Lincoln Municipal Code, section 2.50.070 and 2.05.080 regarding attendance requirements for continued participation on boards, committees, and commissions, and finding the ordinance is exempt from the environmental review under the California, did I just lose my mic?
No?
Okay. The echo just went away for me.
It did.
All right, better. Under California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. Ms. Mollenkopf.
Thank you, Mayor. The Lincoln Municipal Code establishes several committees, boards, and commissions that serve in an advisory capacity to this council. And we have found over the years that their expertise and advice has been very valuable in forming policy decisions that are ultimately decided by this council. In recent months, maybe a year or so, we've had some issues regarding attendance at these meetings and having full participation of these appointeds to these commissions. And so I was asked as the city attorney to come to you with a proposal to essentially elevate the requirements for attendance. So the way the ordinance is currently written is the individual is excused automatically if they miss 3 regular meetings in a row. That can be somewhat challenging because sometimes meetings are canceled. And then the 3 meetings in a row also isn't reflective necessarily of the work that goes in by each of these committees or commissions. There are certain of our boards or commissions that meet once a quarter. And so if you miss 3 meetings in a row, you've missed 75% of your meetings. Some of our boards and commissions meet once a month, maybe more frequently, depending on the circumstances. And so the suggestion was given that we change that to missing 25% or more of the regular meetings of the committee. Now, I already know I've received some feedback from council members that there is a suggestion by Councilmember Carl Skint to delete regular meetings and make it all meetings, because there are oftentimes exigent circumstances where there needs to be a special committee meeting scheduled to respond to something in our community. And those meetings are typically scheduled at a regular board meeting with the consent of everyone in the room. And so that was suggested. And then I believe Mayor Joyner, you had possibly another potential change.
I do. I think personally, if council is amenable, I'd like to see it be a rolling year rather than a calendar year. The notion of having a reset as the calendar resets troubles me a little bit. I'd rather see it be a rolling year.
So in other words, rephrase it to say during the past 12-month period.
That's not a work. No, because that's only
No.
past.
Okay,
Yeah, that'll work. That'll work. You don't know you're going to miss it in the future, right?
okay,
Yeah, that'll work.
okay.
Is there a reason you're avoiding the term rolling 1-year period?
I just think that might be more susceptible to an effort to try to figure out what does that exactly mean? Rolling based on what? The fiscal year, based on the calendar year, based on when they were appointed. So,
Everybody okay with that change?
Yeah, that's fine. I think rolling is confusing to me, so, but I'm fine with the 12 months or whatever that's.
okay. All right, well, so with that, those are changes that I would deem significant enough that I'll have to bring this ordinance back to you at our next meeting. They're not just simple typographical errors or changes. And so with that direction, I would suggest that you give me authority to make these revisions. We will continue this to the next meeting certain, which is our second regular meeting in January.
Since people may have shown up for the public hearing.
I
Even
would
though
certainly
it's in
open it up to see if they have any comment to provide us further direction.
I'll go to the council first. Any questions or other changes? All right. With that, then I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify on this matter, if you could please come to the podium. It's technically public testimony, so it's just any comments that you might have. It's
are done quarterly. And when you said 25 to miss 25% or more? so
Could
they
you pull that
miss-
microphone down?
Okay. So if they miss, they have it 4 meetings a year, they miss 1. Is that 25%?
Correct.
So they would be out.
That is unless there is an opportunity for them to have a cause exemption. So if they are absent from a meeting for cause, then that would not be included in that tally.
Cause you mean like a,
So if they contact the clerk of that board and commission and they're unexpectedly out of town that day, there's been a family emergency, something like that, then they can be excused.
oh, okay. So
For
it's not a
cause.
Definite 25%.
Absolutely. It's 25% without cause.
Okay. And then what is it? Just, I'm not familiar with this. What does the CEQA have to do with it?
That's a great question, and I would love to prop you up to the state legislature to answer that question. We are now, under California law, required in every staff report to make a CEQA finding. That is a California Environmental Quality Act, and we have to make a finding that this ordinance doesn't qualify for CEQA review. And so because this is not a project, because we will be I'm going to be asking the council at the next meeting to be making a finding that there is no possible way that this ordinance change could impact the environment, that CEQA is not implicated and therefore we do not have to go through a CEQA review.
So you're covering yourself.
Co-
in a way,
Well,
because
It's a
What-
state mandate.
CEQA to
it's a
me-
state mandate.
Okay, okay. 'Cause CEQA to me relates to different things, but I just
We
have a
agree.
question about that.
We agree completely.
Just wondering. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to testify on this? When, anyone online?
No, Mayor, no hands are raised.
All right, so we'll go ahead and Christine, you'll take that, make the revisions, bring it back at our next meeting.
I have that direction and we will put it on for the next meeting.
All right, thank you. That wraps up public hearings. We'll move on to general business. Item 10A, workshop, Village 5, fiscal analysis and tax sharing. Mr. Scully.
Here for this.
And just to clarify, you closed the public hearing.
Good evening. So as I wait for the PowerPoint to, oh, there it is. This is a workshop. This is intended to provide you, the council and the community with some draft data that has been done as sort of the backbone work to the negotiation of the Village 5 tax sharing agreement. Village 5, as most folks on the council know, has been a project that's sort of been long studied, discussed here. And as the project slowly moves through the LAFCO process, one of the requirements prior to any really any vote on annexation is that the city and county must have a completed tax sharing agreement done. And so prior to my tenure here at the city, that effort had sort of stalled, and the city was working on a couple of other tax sharing agreements, notably Village 7 and Sud B. Those were completed, so we turned our attentions to this. Because of the scale of this annexation, it's a very large area of land. The county and the city felt that it was important to take an extra step and have an analysis done by expert firm. In this case, it's Goodwin Consulting, who I've worked with many, many times over the course of my career, mostly in reading the reports, but that is well-known in the area and do this type of work commonly throughout, certainly Northern California. And so I'm going to step you through some of the findings and talk a little bit why they're important. But as I do that, just understand that this is still draft data and there may be some changes before we come back and are ready to finalize it. So first, I kind of answered the question about why do a fiscal analysis. Well, you can't really, in my mind, you can't really have a discussion about how you split up property tax revenues after an annexation without understanding what are the costs that you're trying to compensate for in terms of city providing services, and then what services are relieved from the county that the city picks up, and what services do the county maintain even after annexation. And so in addition to that, we also need the other side, so you have the expenditure side, and you need to understand what the revenue side may look like. And in a project as expansive as this, you'll see that there are a number of assumptions that are made, and they're made intentionally to be very, very conservative, because it doesn't do to paint a rosy picture and then have that not materialize, especially when you need to provide basic police and fire and services to a new area that you're annexing. So the second part will be to kind of go through those preliminary findings with you. And then we'll talk a little bit about the tax sharing agreement status, where we stand today, and then any questions the council or community have. So I kind of talked about this, but just to explain, the way that the study is put together is that the consultants basically look at relevant data. They look at the land uses that are identified in the plan for Village 5. They look at estimated property values at the build out or phases of the build out of Village 5. They look at estimated sales tax receipts that are going to be representative of the commercial area within Village 5. They look at demographic data, growth patterns, budgets from both the city and county. And then and I'm going to get into a very interesting slide here in just a minute of the tax rate areas that are currently and then would be, should annexation be approved in Village 5, which will give you, it's pretty illuminating to see how an average dollar of property tax is split up amongst many different entities. And then the second part is they develop a fiscal impact model. And basically use that to spit out a variety of data to give us an idea about how this may look if the project is approved and as it develops. Okay, so here's the first and probably most important slide. So to explain it, and I tried to make it as big as possible. And when we have, if anybody in the community or council wants to dive through a draft of this report, please just send me or the city clerk an email, we'll provide it. There will be some changes to this before it's finalized, but I'm just showing, I'm trying to give some basic information so that we can all get on the same page. So what you'll see in the columns on the right-hand side, you'll see annual impacts and build out. There's 3 columns there. Base case assumes that the project builds exactly how the plan was drawn up and adopted by the city council. That means 8,942 units of a variety of different housing types, single family, multifamily, et cetera, and 4.3 million square feet of commercial space. Scenario 2 assumes that more residential is built and less commercial space is built. So that number, the 10,837, assumes that basically the project underbuilds commercial. Maybe there's market conditions that change. Maybe there are changes to the plan in the future that some future community group or council gets approved. So it assumes basically that half that commercial is built and thus a larger portion of residential. And the furthest one to your right is assuming nearly no commercial is built, 100,000 square feet, and 12,732 units are built. What we're going to have before this comes back to you a last time is we are going to have basically a tier 2 more scenarios that one that is in between the base case and scenario 2, so probably roughly 3 million square feet of commercial built, and one that is in between scenario 2 and 3, so roughly 1 million square feet built. Just to show you, because what we know is that it's not like you snap your fingers and then tomorrow morning there's 4 million square feet of commercial. It takes time and things change over a long period of time. And we have folks from the development community here this evening, and I'm sure they would tell you that this is a very, very long-term build out for Lincoln. So that's the scenario, so those are the assumptions. Now, when you go down a level, you'll see that there's revenues represented for everything except property tax. Then you'll see baseline expenses that are generally going to be associated with Village 5. And to make it real simple for everybody, we're talking general fund expenditures. So those for Lincoln are essentially recreation, police, and fire services. They're the vast majority of our general fund. And library, I apologize. And so what doesn't look real pretty, if that was where the chart ended, is the figures that are in parentheses that represent significant deficit. But I'll explain why that's okay in just a moment. If you keep going down, you'll see that the percentage splits between the city and county that are recommended then represent property tax that's either retained by the county or allocated to the city after the annexation. Then if you go down one more to the very bottom third, you'll see the net fiscal impact. Placer County, is my understanding, has essentially a policy that they don't approve tax sharing agreements that represent revenue loss over their expenditures. And it's my understanding is that it's a board policy. That being the case, the model is established and the percentage splits are established to essentially make it a revenue neutral project for Placer County. What you see below that is a couple different scenarios of what it looks like for Lincoln at the end of the day. So in the base case, what that represents, that 0.2 number at the bottom, is a $200,000 deficit on a yearly basis for Lincoln. You see that as commercial is in scenarios 2 and 3 starts to become less and less important or built in the project, the revenue situation becomes worse from a deficit perspective. Makes sense, right? You're not collecting sales tax, which is a key component to the finance of this project. So that said, the very bottom deficit per unit is a super important data point for us because nearly every project that Lincoln probably has ever annexed has a deficit associated with a per unit amount per home. And the way that the council in the past and currently has chosen to bridge that is they've created a community facilities district, which is essentially a Melrose, to make up that difference. I can tell you that in certain areas of 12 Bridges, for example, that are building now, the deficit per unit is significantly more than $17 per home. And so in some of those areas, I'd have to defer probably to Nina and Travis, but I believe like even recently we have some that are annexing into those districts that are $300 or $400 per year. So the numbers actually don't look that bad, provided that the commercial builds out. Now, I'm going to explain in a second why this is so conservative. Actually, this very next slide will show some of it. So how do you calculate what you think you're going to receive in terms of property tax? Well, in order to do that, you have to get an idea about how many homes we expect to build. We know that generally. And you have to get a better idea about how much is the assessed valuation of each one of those new homes when they're built. And somebody moves in and then all of a sudden they've locked in their property tax levels. So the consultant used the best column to really get an idea about is if you go 4 over to assessed value per unit, that estimates, and keep in mind, this is over a very long period of time. So these numbers are likely to increase, change, shift. They estimated what they thought the assessed value would be depending on the land use type, and then multiplied that times the number of units expected. So you see that there's a land use designation in the plan that's called village rural residential. Those are typically many very large lots, very large homes, probably on some acreage. And so they're going to be much more expensive than an average single family home, for example, that I live in. The village country estates is slightly smaller than rural residential, but still large lots, still typically much larger homes. And so their assumption is that those homes, at least a base level for the purposes of the exercise, would be in the 700,000, 728 range. Then you go down to village low density residential. That's essentially single family homes, like the vast majority of Lincoln lives in. And at 512, I don't know who has been in the real estate world recently, but even with the slowdown, it's awful hard to pick up a home in Lincoln for $512,000. That's good for the purposes of this analysis, because if we inflated that to something that's more representative of the market today, it would maybe give us a rosier picture than may actually exist down the road. So it's important to this is sort of like I don't want to say worst case scenario, but it's trying to be as conservative as possible. And as you go down, you can see how they represent multifamily projects, and then you can go down to the assessed value per square foot for a variety of commercial uses and how they would assess that. Okay. Okay, this is the slide that I think is super interesting. So most folks, including myself sometimes, don't really know where their property tax dollars go to. This in a nutshell would represent generally what your property taxes, well, they likely look like if you're already in incorporated Lincoln, and would look like in Village 5 post annexation if approved. The way to read it for me that's most simple is to think about it in dollar terms. So that TRA column you see that the county essentially receives 29 cents on the dollar. If you go down, you see a variety of other small districts, county library, fire control, Placer County Cemetery, Placer County Water Agency. The big one, obviously, is that Western Placer Unified School District represents essentially 53 cents on the dollar of every dollar that's paid property taxes. So I understand that I may be quoted in saying this, but I think it's like a pretty well-known fact that in California, when cities and counties are trying to negotiate tax sharing agreements, sometimes what we're really doing is negotiating who is the bigger loser in a losing game. you see at the very bottom there, property tax to be shared between county general fund and city of Lincoln, we're really talking about 32 cents on the dollar. That's what we're arguing about. The remainder of it is not on the table, never will be. And if the council would like me to get into how the educational realignment fund, which is the ERAF column at the very bottom, works, we can do that, but we might be here for hours. So that's really what we're discussing as far as it relates to property taxes. Okay, I'm sorry about this. I tried my best to make this larger. And like I said, if someone wants to deep dive this more, please let me know. This is a really interesting slide because it only really makes sense to show this analysis if we're also discussing how does sales tax factor into the overall take in terms of revenues for the city and our ability to provide services. Village 5 has a significant amount of commercial area compared to most of the other annexations that Lincoln has done historically. In fact, I think it's probably the biggest. It represents Lincoln's, probably only significant opportunity to really attract more commercial to our community so that our residents, A, don't have to drive to Rockland and Roseville to get, essential goods and services, but also hopefully to attract folks that are from regional areas. So, but what's important to know about these numbers is you see this taxable sales number, it's $200 million. Keep in mind that of your normal sales tax that we all pay whenever we go buy something, the city receives 1% of that. That's our take. So depending on where you live, the tax rate, let's say, is 7%, the city receives 1% of that. The reason why this is a super conservative analysis is if you go down to the very bottom, and I'll read it for folks because it's really small, it essentially assumes that based and pooled sales tax, the city would generate roughly $1.29 million per year, assuming full commercial build out. So it doesn't sound all that exciting, given how much commercial you're building, but this is the reason why. The analysis only took into account the spending power of the folks that actually live in Village 5, right? So the 8,900 units, let's assume they just magically popped up tomorrow. This chart only assumes the consultants basically have an idea about demographics, and that folks that live in certain areas tend to spend their money first in those areas immediately around them. And so they're able to make reasonable assumptions of how much they would spend within the commercial area of Village 5. So you can figure that, for example, when I need to go to the supermarket, I don't live in the 12 Bridges area, or let's, that's not a good example. Let's say that someone in the 12 Bridges area needs to use the supermarket. Well, they could go to the closest one, which would probably be Raley's for them, or they could go to Safeway, right? Or they go Walmart. So I don't think, I think it's reasonable to assume that the vast majority of the rest of Lincoln, especially if this project ends up having some unique commercial that doesn't exist elsewhere, will likely patronize this commercial project. In addition, it doesn't build in who we think that we call, I think in the tax world, they call it leakage. It'd be reverse leakage in this case. Who can we bring in from Marysville and Yuba that maybe can't receive, some kind of unique commercial that you can't get up there, or Penryn, or unincorporated county, or for that matter, Rockland and Roseville. And so you figure that this conservative investment only assumes those folks that live there. That $200 million per year number is very, very, very low. We figure, I tried to ask the consultants whether or not they could kind of ballpark what the collection could be if you're building in all these other folks. And they basically said, it's really impossible to tell unless you know about use, and also all the other commercial that's building in and around the South Placer area. So that's kind of the basic data. Here's the latest on the status. So we're kind of nearing completion. This report was like a super important milestone to get through. I've really appreciated working with Vanessa at Placer County, who has helped immensely move this project forward. The good news for Lincoln is that we have really good models, and that looks like a 1, but it means 7. Previous Village 7 and SUDB tax sharing agreement models have provided a great framework for Lincoln and for the county. And there's a couple key reasons why. First off, the provisions allow for basically a look back, or have allowed for a look back, essentially meaning that you're not entering into a forever agreement that can never be reopened and rediscussed. And so if things do not materialize, the market changes, costs go up more than we think, all of those things give some ability for the city and the county to get back together on either side and talk about whether or not the share makes sense. In addition to that, the city council was fairly prudent a number of years ago in establishing a public safety community facilities district that's intended to bridge any gaps that we occur. So the idea being that current residents do not subsidize the services that are needed for new residents. So it's like an important tenet. We hope to, at least at a staff level, be complete with this later this month and or February. This data goes a long way. Again, I'll say that before I go to questions, the biggest part of getting there will be getting those 2 bridge scenarios that I mentioned that kind of fall in between scenarios 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. And what you'll likely see is a tiered structure similar to how SUDB works. X number of commercial square feet finally gets built and finalized, then the city receives a greater portion of property tax, and so on and so on and so on. The question I get a lot about this is, why would the city get more property tax if it has more commercial? Because you're collecting more sales tax. The reason is that commercial development typically has a much lower service demand for county services from the county's perspective than normal residential does. And so what I would say to the city council, hopefully it's remembered into the future, is someday, 10 years from now, and a developer shows up on the Village 5 project and wants you to rezone a significant portion of commercial, that whoever those decision makers are, have a real hard look at that and understand that there are consequences, not only from a sales tax take, but from a reduced property tax take for that kind of action. So that's really the bones of the analysis thus far. And anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions or any follow-up you'd like. And so our goal is to try to return to you one of the next couple of meetings with not only a final report, but the agreement as well.
All right, very good. Any questions from council for staff?
Not really. That was very thorough.
No?
Thank you.
So, oh, go ahead.
Okay.
I am curious about a couple of things. One, has the county actually given you a breakdown of their projected costs? Have they justified that number?
It's not granular. What you didn't see in this draft, but is available in the draft report if anybody wants to look at it, is county budget line items and city budget line items. And then what essentially consultant did was they extrapolated out how much more it would cost to provide service for an increase in population. So for example, the chief doesn't necessarily agree with this metric, but we're just using it for an example. Let's assume we said, we think we need to have 1 police officer per 1,000 residents. What the consultant did was, with all services across the board, is they found whatever that ratio generally was to currently and into the future, and they extrapolated it out to 8,900 units times an average of 3 individuals per unit. So the answer to your question is not, it's not detailed to the level of like, do we know line item by line item exactly how much more, but it is forecasted out based on assumed increased service demand based on current service provided to unincorporated residents, or for that matter, city residents.
Can they quantify current service levels provided to city residents? We've never been, to my knowledge, we've never been able to actually get them to say, this is the amount of service we provide to you. Here's what it costs us on an annual basis. We've never seen that.
Yeah, so what I think you'll see in the final document is some resuscitation of generally, here's how much it costs. And Mayor, I don't know for sure if it's down to the individual, but it's certainly something that we could do. It's just a math exercise.
If we can get something close enough,
Mhm.
I'd very much like to see that.
Mhm.
And then my other, really more of a comment about the importance of those two bridge steps that you want to bring in. Christine brought us up to date on the Middle Class Housing Act of 2022 today, which can change this and make those numbers very important for those of you who don't know. What it apparently does is takes land that is zoned commercially and allows for that to be built as residential without having to come back to the council for a zoning change. So that is a potential game changer as online shopping comes on, reduces brick and mortar, the need for brick and mortar could be reduced, and then a natural move by developers will be to say, what else can we do with our land? And that could be residential. So those two interim steps that you want to get to,
Yep.
I think will be important.
Yeah, we may, because I think you'd have to ask the Brian Cooley who's here with Richland today, but my perspective is that I think it's unlikely you see all 4 million square feet build, but something to aspire to.
All right. There's nothing more from the council. Mike.
Historically, when the councils have had to make this decision, it was a decision forever. What you have here, when things change, when nobody wants brick and mortar businesses, when you've lost space, there's the ability to readdress that. And that's, it's significant in my mind that this current model shows that the CFDs are going to be less than the existing CFDs. So that's a positive. We're still growing with those CFDs. But if that's wrong, there is the escape. And I believe that whether we have the granularity in the cost breakdown for the county today, when you go back into renegotiations 5 years, 7 years ago, they're going to have to give that granularity just as we will to figure out what is fair and reasonable. So I would give a lot more thought and a lot more angst if the tax sharing agreements weren't built on the models that they are built. And that if anything came out of our little exercise, this all started when we did the tax increment thing, showing how your projections were so far off that it put the bind that we were in. And so every tax sharing agreement since then has been modeled, and each time the model gets a little bit better with a little bit more. I'm not talking about the financial model, I'm talking about the legal model.
Right. Sean, I'm sorry if I missed it. I know it's not final yet. Do we have a preliminary percentage split yet? I know it was on the screen.
Yeah.
50.
I'm sorry.
45, 55, okay.
Yes, so on the base case, it would be a 45%. I think something else is a 45% share to Lincoln, 55% to Placer County. As you could see, oh, you know what? It's not up. I apologize. So scenario 2, which is that only 2 million square feet build, it's a 42% share to Lincoln and a 58% share to Placer County.
All right.
In the final scenario, if nothing built except just homes, 38% to Lincoln and 62% to the county.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? With that, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item? Please feel free to come to the podium. Yes. Sorry, for the folks at home, we need to see you at the podium so they can hear you and see you.
You mentioned public safety.
Mhm.
That's could be incorporated in the people that are living there, the developers. Okay,
Yeah. So the easy way to think about it, this is the way I think about it in the most simplest terms. Almost all of the money that is going to be received through whatever the agreement ends up being will go towards police, fire, essentially police and fire. There are other smaller services, but they represent a large portion of general fund for us.
Okay.
Yep.
It's getting larger and you're minimally staffed.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Albert?
Good evening, Albert Schreiber. Kind of to maybe elaborate on that. So, and maybe I missed it. I apologize if I did. Because it's my understanding that even with the additional police and fire that you've added recently or you're going to, you're still way short. And so does this take into account making up for that shortfall? Or who's filling that gap? Thanks.
Yeah, so no, the answer to the question is no. The analysis is what does it take to provide services to that geographic area and anticipate a population full stop. So we can't it wouldn't do to make up for deficiencies in, for example, really old areas of town that have maybe not so generous a tax sharing agreement off of new development. It violates sort of one of these central tenets of taxation, which is benefits received. And so therefore the idea being that those who are paying the tax should be receiving some benefit of said tax. So the way that the city has been making up ground, and we have made up some ground in public safety, both in fire and police, has been to use the tool of the community facility public safety district, which I think of it like if you receive, if you're a child and you receive 75% of your allowance from your mom and you need another quarter for whatever you're going to go buy, your dad as the CFD and he comes in and gives you that extra quarter. So essentially new development, if there's any shortfall in what we're receiving from the county, the makeup is that community facilities district. I don't know if that's a good analogy.
No, I love it. I'd like to see that textbook go into classrooms. Very cool. Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening, Council. Melanie Borchard and Sean, thank you for that presentation. I guess my first question is also related to first responders. I believe it's in the municipal code that lists one police, one fire, whatever the delineation is per 1,000 residents. Is that in the municipal code? How is that determined? Is that up for changes as our city grows and our population grows, especially with residential? And also I'd like to circle back to the idea you presented that incomes or residential taxes funds provide more income for the city versus commercial, if I understood that correctly.
Yeah, let me take those in reverse order if that's okay. So from a public finance perspective, it's actually, I probably misspoke. It's the reverse. The more commercial that the city develops, the easier it is typically on property tax. Lincoln has, for a city of our size, a very low sales tax take in comparison to, for example, even Roseville for sure, but even Rockland. And the reason is this concept that someone taught me years ago of OPM, other people's money, meaning that every time that, for example, you drive down to Rockland and you purchase something at Target.
Trader Joe's.
Yeah, well, assume it's a taxable good from Trader Joe's. What we are doing, I do it, everybody here probably does it, is we are incrementally giving dollars to Rockland and Roseville to fund their public safety. So we want to capture more of that back here. To your second question, I'll let the chief jump in on it, but we do have general standards of staffing. But what we've learned is that the police service has changed over time. And it used to be, if you went back maybe even 10, 15 years ago, the 1 to 1,000 ratio was super normal. You heard it everywhere. We need one officer for every 1,000 people. And in really challenging communities that are higher in crime. Sometimes it is even like 1 to 500. Chief, do you want to kind of address that, how you identify and sort of evaluate where your service needs are?
Right. So over the past probably 4 or 5 years ago, when we were talking about the tax sharing agreement, we wanted to come up with the ideal staffing ratio. And this also was a part of the conversations when going for the CFDs for the police and fire. And collectively considering the crime levels, the activity levels of both police and fire, we came up to the agreed upon ratio where our goal is for sworn staff, we wanted 0.85 officers per 1,000 and then 0.66 fire personnel per 1,000. And we were very comfortable based on the demographics and the activity in the city that those would be adequate staffing levels. So that's the goal that we're shooting for. So that's, I'm not sure if it is listed in the municipal code, the 1 to 1,000, but the 0.85 is where we're striving for. And with the CFDs and the makeup that the CFD is designed for, the split between the county tax and the CFDs, that is to staff 0.85 officers and 0.66 of fire personnel in those areas. So moving forward, I wouldn't anticipate changing that. I'm still comfortable with those numbers. Our crime level and activities haven't changed since we did that assessment a few years ago.
So that's from the police side. Is there, from the fire side, anything that's ever presented to the council, or do you guys work with them, or how is that number? Because everything I see from our fire department here in Lincoln seems like they're way understaffed and they're way overworked and.
Right. So the 0.66 fire personnel per 1,000 was generated at the same time we came with that 0.85. So there was a study created, just a workload study for both police and fire. So the 0.66 and the 0.85 were concluded at the same time. So the goal is 0.66 fire personnel per 1,000. And based on our call volume and the types of calls we go on, we're comfortable with that staffing level.
Thank you.
And you may not be aware, we've just taken on board 9 new firefighters.
I was, and
So-
they got their back.
Right.
Like their social plus a little bit. We got 45 calls.
Never seen that one. Any other members of the public wishing to comment on this? Seeing none. Gwen, anyone online?
No, Mayor, no hands are raised.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sean. Well done.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and move on to council initiated business. Does any member of the council wish to bring forward an item of?
I had
initiated
a thought,
business?
and all this talk about, not necessarily stop signs, or whatever, but crosswalks. The other night, we were coming out of Buonarroti's and walking across the crosswalk. We had the green light and the car comes around and almost hit me because they weren't seeing us in the crosswalk. I know there's a lot of stories about the schools and all that. Roseville has certain areas where their crosswalks are painted bright green. And I'm wondering if maybe that's something that we can look at. I mean, we had an incident where, 2 ladies were hit right by McDonald's in the crosswalk. And so I think there are things that we can do that are more cost effective. I mean, I think we should look at the older part where our friend was talking about the stop signs or the speed limit signs, whatever. That's a concern. I think there's areas of town that maybe, and they actually look kind of cool. They don't look bad, but I drive through there a lot. And I see these bright green crosswalks and I'm thinking that might be a solution. So I just want to throw that out there to staff, to council, to maybe that's something that we can look at. In areas that are a little bit more dangerous and people walking across. Anyway, that's just an idea.
So Travis, maybe take a look at methods of creating high visibility in a very cost efficient manner. And we all know about the lighted crosswalks and the flashing lights and all that. I think that's way out of our budget. But
Yeah, but the
something
bright
like this may
green
be-
is very effective. I mean, you come up on it, you see it. It's not hidden.
So traditionally for that bright green which is a MMA, it's a different type of striping. We use it for conflict areas between bikers and vehicles. Are you guys discussing using it for crosswalks for pedestrians?
I think that's.
That was my
manner in which it was
idea.
brought up,
That was
but
my idea.
Is it possible that that's exactly what you're looking at in Roseville is a conflict area between bicycles and pedestrians?
No, it's crosswalks across the road. It's not just conflict area, it's crosswalks. And there's several of them.
We could definitely look into that. And I know current MUTCD standard talks about having those neon signs for all your pedestrian crosswalk ahead, stuff like that. So as we go through projects, we can refurbish or replace the standard federal yellow with the brighter neon green signs and do some other very cost-effective ways to bring attention to it.
Thank you. I'd like to see us do some movement on that and help make our residents feel safer and be safer. So we've been talking about it for a while. I'd like to see us do something with that.
In the past, I worked with UC Berkeley Safe Trek. You can apply usually for a free grant and they'll do a complete street assessment, usually one day, but they can hit some hot spots and they'll look at the multimodal like buses, pedestrians, bicyclists, scooters, and they'll give some recommendations on like complete streets implementation to make it safe for all modes of transportation. So that's something I can look into and see if the grants are available.
Thanks, Matt.
Anything else?
Not for business, no.
Anyone else for council initiated business? Seeing none, we'll move on to information items. Any member of the council have an information item they'd like to share?
So Mayor, were you going to, because I know there's some in the audience, I know it was on consent agenda, but are you going to mention planning? Okay, all right, then I'm gonna let you do that. Okay. Did you want us to give an update on the wastewater treatment?
If you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
that would be
Do
great.
you want to? Go ahead, Dan.
The formation of the JPA.
Yeah. And I'll jump in if I need to.
We've fully formed the JPA.
Tell the audience what we're talking about.
I'm sorry. The Lincoln SMD1 Wastewater Authority is a joint powers agreement between portions of the county and the city of Lincoln, in which the wastewater treatment plant is transferred to that authority and will be operated separately from the city or the county. It's been a process that's been worked on for the last 2 years. The boards of both county and the city approved it in December. The formation meeting was in December. The last meeting was in January. We have hired a general manager who's responsible for overseeing the contractor that actually does the work. And we just hired the counsel, the lawyer for the authority. The interesting thing is that the city is, we have gotten a good asset from the city because wastewater plants handle wastewater. And you size a wastewater plant, what is called normal daily flow. You also have to plan for and handle wet weather winter flow, because you have to process a lot more water containing less waste, but you still have to flow a lot more water through the site. In December, no, the 1st of January, the wastewater plant handled more wastewater than at the worst case wastewater than it was designed for. And it did it without having to use any of the emergency basins that are normally utilized for that wet water flow, which says that the plant is really operating well. We're getting the capacity that we need. The next item big item on the agenda for the JPA, for the authority, is to come up with the rates that they are going to charge to the city for processing of water in the county. They will be the same amount, I mean, per gallon. And that we should do in the February timeframe, I think. But it is up and running. I'm very pleased with the board that we have. Holly and I are representing the city, and Jim and I guess Shanti
Landon.
are representing the county because
Supervisor,
yeah, because they, by definition, the two districts, District 1 and District 2, have the ratepayers or the users of the authority. So they will, whoever is in that position will be on the board. So can you think of it?
So you've hired an interim.
An interim
General
GM.
manager.
Who is that?
A fellow named George Barber
George Barber
out of West
with West
Yost.
Yost. Mhm.
West
Um,
Yost, right?
He
He's doing a good
is
job so
very
far.
dynamic
Mhm.
and really seems to be enjoying his job.
Yeah, he
So,
is.
Do
And
you have anything? to
just
add?
as a side note, this last couple weeks through the storms, what Councilmember Carlos said about not having to use our reserve basins, which is good because the work that we did up to this point has allowed for that with the water. But also what I wanted the public to know, we thanked them at our last board meeting, but we had a couple days where it was really dicey because of the storm, because of the weather, and our staff, Jen Brown and her staff, and the staff out at the plant stayed up all night to make sure the plant had full power, was operating. So I just wanted everyone to know that, our staff is on it and they saved us. It was great. Just really proud of the work that they've done through the storms and all this crazy weather we've been having. But the Joint Powers Authority, the wastewater treatment authority it's up and running and it's operating well, and we will keep you updated.
It's interesting why storms cause the problem for a sewer plant, wastewater plant. First of all, there's incursion, there's leakage in all of the pipes that are in the ground, where there's hundreds of miles of pipes. And besides that, if you think about it, there's a bunch of ponds that is how the plant operates. Well, those ponds are getting inches of water added to them also. So it's not only the effluent coming in with the additional stormwater that's leaked in, you also have the water that is just dropping on top of the plant too. So I know more
So you know
about.
you pick the right people for the job when they get excited about the effluent and the leakage into the plant.
We're having a lot of fun, aren't we, Dan?
So just help me out. The primary reason that we formed the JPA was to fund and build the expansion. It sounds like the next step you're taking is setting rates. How is the funding and the expansion of the plant going? How is it agendized? Is that moving forward?
We have estimates on the plant expansion. And we're building the financial model that will tell us what contribution current ratepayers will make and what the connection fee needs to be to support that.
And that run in parallel with moving towards the construction, the funding and construction. of the
Yes,
plant?
yes,
And is that being done?
not yet. I mean,
Well, it is. I mean, we literally
we
just.
haven't discussed it yet.
We haven't discussed yet because we had an
Yes.
emergency, or not emergency, a special meeting to finish all of the technicalities. Then we had the special meeting was to set up the board. and do all that. And then we've had one normal, regular board meeting where we hired our general counsel and did a couple of things. And so moving forward is where we'll start with that. I don't, Nita, did you have an update on that for?
This is a follow-on.
Yeah,
The board is follow-on to something called the COJA committee.
yes.
And the COJA committee spent a lot of time looking at financing opportunities. now.
We've been, yeah, and this council has been updated on that all the way through, so.
Yeah, I'm actually meeting with the general manager tomorrow to discuss the estimated budget. That's one thing that's needed before we set rates. So it's kind of, it's a progression of steps that need to be taken in order to get to the expansion. Before they can get to the expansion, they need to be able to do things like pay bills and take in revenues. But so that's what they're working on at the moment. And at the same time, part of that is setting the rates. And at the same time, part of that is continuing to move forward in that process of developing the specs for the expansion and determining the financing. So that the financing is going to be a bit unique since they're a new agency. So we'll be moving towards getting a team put together for the JPA financing team so that we have the right professionals for that bond issuance.
And council, I would just encourage you to notice that this is not a Brown Act agendized item and that it may be time to move on.
Okay, I was treating it kind of like a council committee report, but. All right, we will move on with that. And with the exception of this question, is there a regularly scheduled meeting now? Something we can put on our calendar?
Yes, it's the first Friday of every month at 11 o'clock.
Here?
Yep, we meet right here.
Thank you.
For the president.
And Councilmember Carlskin is the chair of the board.
Appreciate that. Are there any more information items?
Mayor, is it okay if I just added one, just sort of community concern? On New Year's Eve, the city attorney and I were sort of tracking the weather patterns and dealing with all manner of disaster with this storm. And one of the things that we became very concerned about was the situation that some of our homeless folks are in along the creek. And we've received a number of questions about what actions the city has taken. And I made the decision on New Year's Day, actually, to open up a small area of the pavilion as a sort of temporary emergency location for those folks to relocate to until the worst parts of the storm have passed us by. We just had significant concerns that there was pretty significant danger in those areas. The water moves very quickly, especially in that area. So if you happen to be by the pavilion and you see that, that's the reason why. We expect that will wind down and we will close that location probably by the end of the week. And separately, the city attorney and I are working on bringing forward sort of a proof of concept plan for some alternative to creek camping of our homeless.
Appreciate that. If there's no other information items, I do want to point out, earlier in our agenda, we approved the appointment of 4 new planning commissioners. From where I sit, I can see 3 in the room right now. The 4th is here, it's blocked, I can't see.
He's
Eric
on
Johnson.
Zoom.
He's on Zoom, okay.
Yes.
Eric Johnson, Jerry Johnson, Whitney Eklund, and John Reedy. So I just wanted to introduce them all to you, welcome them on board, and thank you for your ongoing interest in the case of Eric and your new interest in the case of the rest of you. Jerry, you're kind of in between. You're ongoing and new as well. So for those of you who don't know, Jerry Johnson is our former city manager. And so he's taken some time to himself and decided to jump back in. So, welcome all. With that, we stand adjourned.